Welcome to Z's and Threes, and welcome to Where It All Went Wrong, a four-part series where we examine just that. Where it all went wrong for the 29 NBA franchises that failed to win the NBA title this previous season. Each year, 30 NBA teams set out with one goal in mind. At least that's what they all say, and that is to win an NBA title. For about 20% of the league, especially in this era of parity, remember 7 different champs across the last 7 years, that goal is truly realistic. For the other 80%, not so much. I've always said across all sports, no matter the level, no matter the league, you're selling one of two things, either hope or success. Hope can come in many forms. It can be the hope of a title, realistic hope that your team would break through. Think Oklahoma City Thunder fans 2 years ago coming off that playoffs and saying, hey, we hope that this year will be our year. Hope was high across the regular season. They finally broke through. It can be the hope that your team makes the next step in that progression. It could be making the playoffs. It could be for your team to go one round further. It could just be for your favorite player or the best player on your team to make that jump to an all-NBA level talent. Hope can also manifest negatively. Think one step back for 2 steps forward. A record that is poor enough to secure enough lottery balls to potentially warrant drafting a generational talent that will put you in that hope conversation. It could be hope that your franchise finally fires that head coach that you just cannot stand, or it could be hope that ownership finally relents and sells the team. On the other side of things, there's your season being labeled a success, and that a little more clear, winning an NBA title. But is every team's season a failure that doesn't ultimately win the title? Yes, because that is the goal, right, in competitive sports, to emerge a champion. But also no, we all know that every franchise, every team, every player, every circumstance warrants a different narrative, and that is the gray area in which we plan to live over the next 4 episodes of Z's and Threes and part of Where It All Went Wrong. So as we examine the 29 teams that ultimately did not win the NBA title, I have broken them down into 4 different categories. And as you can see below me, part number 1 will be teams who were doomed from the jump. Game number 1, maybe even in the offseason, before the season even began, their season was doomed to end in failure. Does your team fall into that category? Well, here in part 1, episode number 1 of Where It All Went Wrong, you will find out. What are the 3 other categories? We are going to have to wait and see. Episodes releasing every Friday here on the Z's and Threes YouTube channel, so set your notifications. And while you're down there, if you're not yet, like and subscribe to the channel. Look, football season isn't quite there yet. Preseason football has started, and you can only do so many mock fantasy drafts only for your team to eventually end up in this Where It All Went Wrong category. So in the meantime, let's break down 29 NBA teams here on Z's and Threes, Where It All Went Wrong, brought to you by Contract Year. What better place to start than the worst team in the NBA this past season, the Utah Jazz? But to find out where it all went wrong, you have to fast forward past the 17 wins and 65 losses to NBA Draft Lottery Night. Because the Jazz did their best all season to get as many lottery balls as possible to hopefully see their name and logo unveiled when that number 1 first pick envelope was opened on lottery night. Now, we all know that that was not the case. The Utah Jazz ended up having selection number 5, and plenty of drama there with Ace Bailey. Wait to see how that all plays out. But the Utah Jazz made every effort they possibly could to lose as many games as they possibly could so they could potentially select Cooper Flagg. That ended up not being the case. So when they unveiled that envelope, and once we saw that that top 5 order was reconfigured for the Utah Jazz, that is where it all went wrong. I know some of you may be thinking, the Washington Wizards, what? I thought they were the worst team in the league. Well, they had one more win, 18 to the 17 of the Utah Jazz. Still good enough to finish last in the Eastern Conference. The Washington Wizards, coming off a season in which they had the number 1 pick and selected Alex Sarr, who, hey, shout outs to Sarr, late fantasy pickup. That's how I got my trophy right there. He was a big reason. But for the Wizards, where it all went wrong, if you look at the season, they started 2-2. 2 of those wins were against Atlanta. And it was looking like, oh, okay, maybe the Wizards are going to play some decent ball. Well, from there, they proceeded to lose 17 straight. They were on an absolute heater when it came to losing until they finally broke through and beat the Nuggets to snap their 17-game losing streak. For the Washington Wizards, that is where it all went wrong. If you start 2-2 and then proceed to lose the next 17 to move to 2-19, yeah, I think your season is off the rails from the get-go. Moving on up the standings when it comes to wins, because one more than the Wizards were the Charlotte Hornets, who had 19 on the season. And I know what you're thinking. No, this is just not from worst to first. These are just the teams that I've started with in the doomed from the jump. And where it all went wrong for the Charlotte Hornets, I watched a lot of Charlotte Hornets basketball, surprisingly, over this previous season. And where it went off the rails, it was when Brandon Miller was injured 27 games into the season on January 15th against the Utah Jazz. Second-year player, the second overall pick, 6'9" small forward that finished third in the Rookie of the Year voting 2 seasons ago. When he went down, all hope was lost for the Charlotte Hornets. If you remember, there was a game against the Brooklyn Nets, we'll get to them here shortly, in which Charles Lee, a coach with championship pedigree, had come in to the Charlotte Hornets and said, hey, we're doing things differently. We are going to learn how to win. Now, that I know is hard to do, or I think is hard to do, if LaMelo Ball is your best player. Saw someone on Reddit say LaMelo Ball plays the game like he has AirPods in. Couldn't agree more. Brandon Miller, though, to me, will be a star in this league, and he seems to be a dependable player around which the Charlotte Hornets can build. Maybe eventually they end up trading LaMelo Ball, but Brandon Miller, I believe, is their franchise player. So across this last season, and for a head coach and for a front office and ownership that has been completely gutted and building from the ground up, and they want to become a winning franchise, they have made those investments in the people. They have a franchise star, not in LaMelo Ball, but in Brandon Miller. So when he went down in that game against the Jazz, that is where it all went wrong for the Charlotte Hornets season. For the Nets, where it all went wrong, well, this is where it's a little more esoteric and not an exact date or moment. The disconnect between players, coaches, and front office and ownership with what the goals for this season ultimately were. Because the players and coaches wanted to win. Jordi Fernandez, a well-regarded head coach in the NBA and amongst NBA coaching circles, looks to be their coach for the future and the remaining years. But he had his team playing hard, playing good basketball, winning games. Then conveniently, Cam Thomas, their leading scorer, one of their best players, currently locked in a contractual dispute because he's a restricted free agent and wants more money, gets hurt, having played 25 games on the season. And then Brooklyn can start losing games, which it seems is exactly what management want. Players tried, coaches tried, but the organization said, no. We want as many draft picks as possible because playing in mediocrity and winning 30 or 40 games in this league right now with this coming draft is not something that we want to do. So that's what the Brooklyn Nets did. They loaded up on lottery picks. They played a whole bevy of them at Summer League, and now it remains to be seen how good the Brooklyn Nets will be, and do they have a player to which they can build around? What do they do with Cam Thomas? But where it all went wrong, well, it was the disconnect between the front office and their desire to not win right now, and a head coach and coaching staff and players that want to start instituting winning ways. Okay, now is where we really start to have some fun because this is the team and the franchise that ultimately gave me the idea for the series of where it all went wrong. I am talking about the Sacramento Kings and all of their 40 wins to 42 losses, good enough for a play-in spot, ninth in the West. Now, you might be saying, how could you say their season was doomed from the jump when they won 40 games and qualified for the play-in? Well, where it all went wrong for the Sacramento Kings was the firing of head coach Mike Brown. He was the first head coach to go just 31 games in a season that was chock full of surprise head coach firings. We had a lot of them go and a lot of them at very interesting times, but Mike Brown lasts all of 31 games. If you don't remember, there was tension between De'Aaron Fox and Mike Brown. There was a closeout by Fox on a three-point shot that ends up in a Sacramento Kings loss and Mike Brown being fired the very next day. De'Aaron Fox ends up being traded to the San Antonio Spurs. He was eligible for a big contract extension, one which the Spurs have given him, and the Kings have now become the Bulls West with DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine, and a record very similar to the Bulls. But where it all went wrong, and why I say the Kings were doomed from the jump, if you wanted to fire Mike Brown 31 games into the season, there was obviously discontent or a lack of belief in Mike Brown from the get-go. So was this season even going to go down the path of success for a roster that, yes, was talented with De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, but ultimately wasn't living up to the expectations of ownership? But who are we kidding? These are the Sacramento Kings. Mike Brown was the first head coach to take them to the playoffs since the 2005-2006 series. And what's his reward? Well, he's let go by the franchise and ultimately, via a very circuitous extended process, ends up as the head coach for the New York Knicks. But for the Kings, their season was doomed from the jump because they had a lame duck coach in the eyes of ownership in Mike Brown, and it all went wrong 31 games in when they decided to let him go. These three are sure to drum up some comments. Let me know down below because, as you can see, doomed from the jump, I have the Chicago Bulls, the Phoenix Suns, and yes, the Los Angeles Lakers. Let's break each of the three down, but I've put them together because ultimately they had an underlying theme for the three, and that is flawed rosters heading into the season. Let's start with the aforementioned Chicago Bulls when we talked about the Sacramento Kings and trading Zach LaVine, because what is the plan in Chicago? They have been toiling in mediocrity throughout the entirety of this general manager regime and the regime of Billy Donovan, who they, surprisingly enough, just gave a contract extension. But what is the plan in Chicago? Because it seems like every year the plan is to make the play-in and maybe just be good enough to qualify for the 8th and final spot via winning the play-in to be this sacrificial team to go up against the East first seed. Chicago seems to have no plan, and I will give them credit because they execute it perfectly every single year. Speaking of plans, what was the plan that the Phoenix Suns had in mind when they traded for the monster contract of Bradley Beal? It feels as if they were the only people, and Matt Ishbia, their owner specifically, that did not see this coming, and that Bradley Beal in Phoenix would not work out, given the second apron restrictions and the roster restrictions that handicap your franchise when you have three players making that much money. For the Phoenix Suns, they had their moments, and really where it all went wrong was when Kevin Durant got injured, because if you do remember back, KD was playing at MVP caliber levels early in the season, but he could not play enough games to stick around and keep Phoenix at that level in an uber competitive Western Conference. So their roster was flawed from the jump, and that is why they have landed in this doomed from the jump category. Remember, they hung around to the very end of possibly getting a final play-in spot in the West, but weren't good enough to get it. But Phoenix was flawed as a team in their roster construction. That's why you see Kevin Durant now off in Houston. He will suit up for the Rockets with Jalen Green coming back in a salary match. But Phoenix trying to crawl out of that salary cap hellhole. That's why they've had to use the stretch provision on Bradley Beal. He will now be playing for the Los Angeles Clippers. So maybe there is some hope down in the Valley of the Sun. Devin Booker, last man standing. And the LA Lakers. Some of y'all may be saying, whoa, how can you say that the Lakers season was doomed from the jump when they ended up finishing third in the Western Conference with 50 wins? Well, did anybody truly believe that the Lakers roster as constructed was good enough to compete and win a title? LeBron, as great as he played, needed Anthony Davis to make that jump to being the clear-cut number one. And Anthony Davis, to his credit, across the first 2 weeks of the season, was playing also at an MVP caliber level. But Anthony Davis has made a career of being tantalizingly good, but then also showing, hey, you can't count on it for 82 games out of this season. So the Lakers roster was ultimately doomed from the jump. They did not have the pieces that fit around LeBron and AD. So ultimately, what did the Lakers do? Well, they took a once-in-a-lifetime trade opportunity to bring Luka Doncic into the fold. And now you see the Lakers, who have undergone ownership change as well, back to that whole topic of hope. Well, now there's a lot of hope with Luka Doncic in the fold, and you hear more talk about what the Lakers are intending to do down the road, a.k.a. when LeBron James is no longer with the franchise. So the Lakers, in spite of their 50 wins and their first-round exit against the Minnesota Timberwolves, with their roster being as flawed as it was, their season was doomed from the jump. Our ninth and final team in part one, teams that were doomed from the jump, the Miami Heat. And why were they doomed from the jump? Well, breakups and really divorces, they are never easy, and they can get messy, especially down in South Beach, especially with a player the caliber of Jimmy Butler and what he has done across his time being the franchise player for the Miami Heat. But it was clear early on in the season, and then as the season progressed, that the Jimmy Butler era in Miami was no longer. It was a battle of iron wills between Butler and Pat Riley as to who would win, and we all usually know how that plays out. So doomed from the jump, as they knew they wanted to move on from the aging star in Jimmy Butler in spite of the success that they had had. Remember, in the finals just 2 seasons ago, there were the suspensions, the drama that kept carrying out to the eventual breakup, the trade to the Golden State Warriors. But the Miami Heat, you knew eventually that there was going to have to come a time post-Jimmy Butler. Would it have extended throughout the entirety of the season? Well, Pat Riley did not seem inclined to give out the money that Jimmy Butler wanted, so they played out the charade of the season, the suspensions, the back and forth to win 37 games, 45 losses, good enough for 10th in the East, but the Heat ultimately a wasted season that was doomed from the jump. There you have it. 9 of the 29 teams who failed to secure the NBA title and where their seasons all went wrong. For a variety of reasons, but ultimately falling underneath the one umbrella of doomed from the jump. Different from the Utah Jazz, the worst team in the league, all the way up to the LA Lakers, who ended up finishing third in the West. But ultimately, teams whose seasons were doomed to be failures from the get-go. Remember, I mentioned this will be a 4-part series, so 3 more categories to go, releasing every Friday here on the Z's and Threes YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed yet, do like, do subscribe, do share with a friend. What's coming for part number 2 next Friday? Well, I'll give you a hint. It has to do with player health. Injuries, a huge part of the game, and were a huge part of the storylines for teams this past season. So next Friday, we will get into that. Hope you enjoyed part number 1 of the series Where It All Went Wrong from Z's and Threes, presented by Contract Here. We hope to see you back here next Friday. Peace.